You've heard me talk about my sister Wanda, and today I want to tell you a story about how I put her out of a job. See, my sister and Wanda and I have always had this sibling rivalry, and our relationship has always been one of tension. Now, she's a year older than I am, and because of her being born a year before me, she always had this sense of an inheritance of a right. So, for example, if we were going somewhere in the car, she would always be the one to drive. Or if we were going in the car as a family, she would always get the front seat. Whereas my thinking was that, hey, I'm the guy, I'm the man. So I should have the right to choose or decide whether I drive or I get the front seat. Our story is about our neighbor Elaine. Now, Wanda used to babysit for Elaine. And one day, Elaine called looking for Wanda to babysit on the upcoming Saturday night. And Wanda was unavailable. So Elaine, I think in desperation, asked me if I would be interested in babysitting. And I said, sure. I mean, how hard can it be? I mean, if Wanda can do it, anybody can do it. So I said to Elaine, sure. I'd be happy to babysit your two children. A few weeks later, Elaine called the house again looking for a babysitter, but this time she was not looking for Wanda, but she was looking for me. Now, that did not go over well with my sister because she relied on babysitting money financially because she needed the money. When Elaine came to pick me up, Wanda chased me around the car about 3 times, and I had to get up enough steam ahead of her to be able to open the door, jump in the car, and lock the door. So I put Wanda out of that particular babysitting job. See, when it came to conflict in our relationship, Wanda sought restitution. She sought justice. She sought compensation because she was financially impacted by the loss of that babysitting job. Whereas I sought restoration with my sister. I wanted to heal the relationship with her. I don't know how my parents put up with this constant sibling rivalry between us. It certainly must have driven them crazy. But don't we all have relationships that involve some conflict? We have relationships, be it a sibling like me, and my conflict with Wanda. Perhaps it's a coworker or a friend, or maybe even a spouse. Relationships are complicated, and sometimes we make them complicated. You know, first of all, we have the conflict and the tension, and then sometimes we have the unwanted baggage that goes with that relationship. You know, things like gossip and estrangement or rumors or toxic environments. These are all signs that we have not properly dealt with that relationship strain in a healthy way. The curious thing about a conflict in relationships is generally each of the parties feel like they are the victim and the other is to blame. How can we resolve conflict in our relationships? And is there a Christian way that we can go about resolving conflict when it comes to our relationships? In our gospel today, Jesus gives us a step-by-step process about how we can go about solving conflict in our relationships. He says this: if a brother or sister sins against you, go and point out the fault to that one when the two of you are alone. And if he or she listens to you, you have regained your brother or sister. This is private between the two of you. This is in confidence, one-on-one, to see if you can discuss the situation and solve it in a reasonable and charitable way. Now, in our nature, as we as humans are complicated, generally we don't deal with the other person in the conflict. We usually go and involve a third person. And generally that is where rumors and gossip begin because we have not kept it confidential and private between the two of us. We have brought in a third person. The individual or one-on-one needs to be our starting point. But Jesus says if we are unable to resolve the conflict between the two of us, he says this, take one or two along with you. The both of you can explain the situation with one or two other people. This is not about shaming people. This is not about pointing fingers or laying blame, but it's really done out of a position of confidence. It's done out of impartiality. It's not about opinion or who is at fault. The whole process needs to be done out of gentleness and charity and love. Now, maybe you have an issue with a coworker. In step 2 of the process that Jesus recommends, he says, involve a colleague or two and see if you cannot resolve the issue between a small number of people, maybe one or two other people, you and the other. Or maybe it's a relationship or your marital situation or your relationship that you're struggling with. In Jesus' example, we can turn to a trusted couple, another married couple who you can bring in and hope for guidance, who you know will love you and in charity perhaps suggest a solution and work with you through the entire process. And finally, our gospel says, step 3, Jesus says, if the person still refuses to listen to them, even the people who you have brought into your confidence, tell it to the church. In this step-by-step process, we've looked at trying to keep it to just 2 people, individually, privately, one-on-one. If that doesn't work, you move to step 2 and bring in a few others to help you work through a resolution in the problem. And finally, step 3 is, if you've had no luck with the first 2 steps, bring in an authority figure. Again, if it's an issue with a coworker, that authority figure may be a boss or maybe a manager. And in our example with a married couple, maybe it's someone such as a marriage counselor. The aspect that Jesus is pointing out is that can we charitably come to a resolution that is a restoration of the relationship, because it is not about restitution. There is a difference between restitution and restoration. Restitution is about compensation. It's about justice. There is no love in restitution. Restitution is a legal act. It's something that's done out of obligation. Whereas restoration is done out of love and of charity. It's taking the relationship and making it whole once again. Again, there is no love in restitution. There is love in restoration. And let me give you an example. I accidentally break a window of a neighbor's house. Restitution or justice or compensation has me repairing that window. Restoration is me going to my neighbor, repairing the window, but asking for forgiveness and apologizing face to face, eye to eye, and asking for forgiveness. And I am forgiven. He or she forgives me. Restitution is compensation. And restoration is about love and restoring the relationship and making it whole once again. When we have relationships that are broken, we need to have them resolved. I don't know about you, but if there's any gaps in my relationship, then I want to have the awareness to know that I ought to seek restoration. Now, my relationships with God, or my spouse, or a friend, or a neighbor, or a coworker, may I have the awareness to seek restoration. Is there someone in your life where restoration is needed in your relationship. Perhaps somebody has hurt you and they don't know it. They are unaware. But you're unable to have that difficult conversation one-on-one, in person, to let them know that you are hurt and to seek restoration in your relationship. Or maybe you've hurt someone. You've noticed that a relationship has sort of gone off the rails a little lately, and you don't know why. The person acts differently around you. And you think, that's really odd. Like, what's going on? Go to that person and ask and say, is there something that I have done in our relationship? I sense conflict. And is there something I've done that there's a rupture or a gap now in our relationship? Please tell me if I've wronged you somehow. That gives the person the opportunity to bring up the conversation. Jesus recommends that when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to restoration, begin with step one. Sit down with a person, have an honest and open conversation, as difficult as that might be, one-on-one, to clear the air and restore your relationship. Now, there are two things that I want to stress. Number one is the power of prayer. Prayer needs to be involved in order for there to be restoration. Pray about the situation. Pray about the relationship. And if possible, pray for the person and pray with that person if they are willing. And two, St. Paul in our second reading says, owe no one anything except to love one another. The restoration, in order for it to be achieved, must come from a position and out of place of love. The power of prayer and a place of love need to be involved in restoration. They are fundamentally necessary for healing in the relationship. Now, I want to end with a story, and I have Father Simon and Father Alex's permission to do so. Now, as you know, we put a lot of effort into our message. It's a lot. It's work, as you know. So last month I was preaching in the series In Your Head. I was to talk and preach about God's promise for us, and I really could not get a sense of direction or what I was to do. I asked Father Alex and Father Simon for help, and they are busy, and I understand that. But I forged on and went ahead. I spent probably about 15 hours on the homily. And finally, I sat down with Father Simon and Father Alex, and we went over the homily that I had prepared thus far. Now, I can see it on Father Simon's face. He has a knot in his face. And I know that he's unhappy with what I've prepared so far. So we basically tore it apart, and I threw it in the garbage. I spent 15 hours at least on that homily, and it was all for naught. I felt frustrated, I felt defeated, and I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. So I left it. The next day I picked it back up again and spent another 8 or 10 hours working on a message after talking to Father Simon and Father Alex. We met a couple of days after that. And the first thing that I wanted brought up in our meeting was how I felt unsupported. How I just didn't feel like I got enough guidance and direction when preparing the homily. It gave them the opportunity to apologize to me. That was not their intention. Their hope is that our messages are as best as they can be for you because you deserve the best. And I get that. But this does not come naturally to me. I need an awful lot of help and an awful lot of guidance. So, out of that came a decision for us to be really intentional about helping me and them guiding me more as I prepare for homilies. So this homily, although still took a lot of time, took less time than it did last month. And all of that came out of a place of love, because I know I am loved and they are loved by me. It was hard, but I needed to express my frustration, and they apologized, and we have a different process now, which I think will be helpful. So I did step one of the process in what Jesus recommends we do. I took it privately, and I guess it's not so private anymore, but I took it privately to both Father Alex and Father Simon. We prayed about it. We rely on the Holy Spirit, because it is only through the power of God that I am able to do this. We resolved the conflict, and the relationship was restored for all three of us. It came out of a place of love, humility, and trust. In our relationships, when conflict comes along, and it will, we should act out of love and out of charity, and keep in mind that the focus is restoration, not restitution.